Very good afternoon. This session of the Gaidar Forum will be devoted to investments. To be more specific about the role of the public authorities in the investment process. At different stages of the economic development over the past 200 years, there were different stages of greater or lesser role of the government in the economy. We know that over the past 250 years, the role of the state and government fluctuated, going up and down, but this role was always about investments provision in order to guarantee the key priorities of the national development. Currently, we are living at a time of the growing role played by the government, inter alia in investments. Private investment may be deemed to be more dynamic, agile, and effective and efficient. But in many countries, the investments to GDP ratio lags behind savings to GDP. That means that the private enterprise is not always willing to run the risks. And the world is going through a change, hence the business community and organizations are reluctant to assume risks. So the appetite for risk has been dulled. They have dulled the edge of risk appetite. And the government may be the investor of last resort in these circumstances, but that doesn't mean that all the money should be pulled together in the public purse. And for the sake of the government-led investment, a new tool emerged a couple of decades ago, sovereign funds. And the Russian sovereign fund was set up a decade ago, and Mr. Dmitriev has been its CEO over that period of time. I'm so glad that you are with us today at this studio, and the RDIF has played a considerable part in the development of Russian economy in the past decade. But my first question to you is about recapping this decade, taking stock. I know that you had more than 100 projects implemented and more than 200 trillion rubles invested. 2 trillion rubles invested. So my main question is about the outcomes of the first decade. Thank you, Mr. Mau. It's a great privilege to be here with you, and I agree that the state plays an important part in investing, but these must be efficient investment, propitious to growth, and the RDIF can be proud of establishing an efficient investment model. Why we know that? Because we have high yields and returns, and apart from that, the companies that are our targets grow rapidly and create new jobs, and for each invested ruble, we attract around 9 rubles of our partners. So it's a huge multiplier for the investments, and the companies are growing and they provide good returns, and the yields for the government are high. You have mentioned more than 100 projects and more than 2 trillion of funds invested. These are major infrastructure projects that make a change for common people, like hospitals, high-tech projects. So we invest heavily in infrastructure, in high-tech and regional infrastructure. These are signature projects for this nation, and we have established major partnerships with the leading sovereign funds worldwide. Hence, we are capable to attract their funds and their expertise, capitalize on their expertise, and our companies, hence, may have an opportunity to enter those countries' markets. So it is an efficient model with good growth rates, and it has proved its worth by our outcomes. We have been able to grow a great deal of important, significant companies. We invested in the Vladivostok airport and the first bridge between Russia and China. So a lot of milestone projects with new jobs and high-quality economic growth. When I look at the advancement of RDIF, I have an impression that apart from being a sovereign fund, you are a tool for consolidating our political clout worldwide, like your relations established with other sovereign funds and foreign investors. Can you comment on that? Are you an enabler? Well, indeed, coming back to the first question about the international part, I must say that investments are a unifying kind of activities because you can channel your funds and resources properly. It is a targeted process aimed at growth, so we believe that the investment concept is something that must be promoted and more young people will become investors, as we hope, because they help optimize funds and resources. And when we see how it stands in other countries, we can see that countries with trillions of savings want to optimize and employ their savings. And we seek and find people with similar perspectives and similar views about how to put up money and what the most interesting and promising sectors may be. Definitely this has a very good cumulative synergetic effect. We have joint investments in 67 projects with the UAE in different sectors in a broad range of industries, and we coordinate in energy and infrastructure. So investments are an important geopolitical way of communication. And like with Japan, we have some differences. It's clear and obvious. Still, together with them, we invest in a lot of projects, and we have been able to persuade our Japanese partners that investments help us find some common ground that at the end of the day would matter in other aspects, in other domains. Alongside the Japanese companies, we put up money in COVID tests and other interesting undertakings. So investments and business communication are important pillars of our strategy. You have mentioned the healthcare and the COVID tests today, so I can't but ask you a question. How come that the RDIF has started handling the vaccine, and this is a very, very efficient vaccine, and it was the first vaccine worldwide. How come that you arrived at this idea and started investing in this domain, and what are the prospects? And jumping ahead, I must say that I wonder how you're going to fight and tussle with Omicron. Well, Mr. Mau, the COVID topic has put together all the tenets of philosophy that we have within our fund, and we have geopolitical partnerships, as you mentioned, with different nations and countries. So, starting from January 2020, when COVID was at its outset, we figured that it's going to be a major challenge to the humankind. It was a formidable epidemic, we thought, and we were one of the first to start thinking of that. And we had a partner in China. They have a genetic company, and they started the first tests against COVID, and we received valuable information from them. And it became clear that that was perilous, and we began to respond quickly. We focused on the tests and the therapeutic and a future vaccine. We analyzed around 20 different approaches to vaccine development and design, and we're so glad that we have chosen the Gamaleya Research Institute, and there is the underlying logic behind our investment in Sputnik. This is the technology that has stood the test of time. It's 30 years of age, and it was used and proved its efficiency combating Ebola and the MERS syndrome in Saudi Arabia. So this platform proved its worth and efficiency, which is different from mRNA vaccines by the American companies. It is an interesting new technology, fresh technology, but it was never used at a large scale, and it contains no major safety data, a track record of safety data. And, mRNA vaccines, unfortunately, demonstrate and manifest after effects and side effects, very rare ones, and their efficiency drops quickly. So we're glad that we have invested into a reliable solution, which is Sputnik V. And the main thing is that more than 100 million people worldwide received the jabs of Sputnik and are now shielded against COVID. And according to the data from Hungary, out of 5 vaccines employed in that country, Sputnik V is the most efficient, preventing letalities and deaths. So we can see that the efficiency is high. We receive data from different countries, and that is very important for this country. And the data from Argentina, Mexico, Hungary, and other countries worldwide testify to this. With respect to Omicron, well, our interaction with international funds helps us see what is happening. It is quite contagious, very contagious. The lethality and the number of hospitalizations, the proportion of hospitalizations is much less than from the Delta strain, but still the spike of new cases is very, very steep, and in the US they have 1.3 million daily cases, and it is a challenge to the public health system, and definitely we also will have a surge, an upswing, but Sputnik is very efficient against Omicron. Minzdrav recommends, well, the health ministry recommends that within 6 months a boost jab must be applied, but the Gamaleya Institute has been able to confirm, with the help of international labs, that Sputnik is the most efficient vaccine, and its efficiency is reduced the least against Omicron compared to other vaccines. And we believe that Sputnik is a major advance of this country, and it is not accidental. It's built on the virology, school and tradition that we developed starting from Ekaterina the Great and the Soviet Union. Well, Ekaterina II vaccinated against smallpox when it was not at all clear. So she experimented upon her. It was 40 years prior to the first vaccine jab in the United States. So can you tell me the following? On the one hand, you are a provider of international contacts and interaction, but on the other hand, I have a feeling that still we have a lot of issues with the big pharma sector. Like, on the one hand, we have 100 million doses applied worldwide, but on the other hand, well, there is a long, lengthy delay of international recognition. Is it about the big pharma pressure? because I have a feeling that it is trying to avoid fair competition. It's quasi-competition. So it's not about the vaccine quality. Well, I might sound tactless, but still, can you comment? Well, without a doubt, you have raised an important point. When we started merging to that market, we gathered that the big pharma market is very complicated, competitive, and tough. Sometimes it is beneath decency. One of the companies of big pharma paid $4.7 billion in official fines over the past decade because it pursued illegal competition and tried to suppress competitors and subdue competitors. $4.7 billion is a whopping amount of money, and they spend $12 billion per annum to promote their products, lending info and administrative support. So they have a lot of ties and resources, and they exert actual control and sway over the media space. So many of the journal's editors and scientists, they receive grants from the big pharma. So it is a sophisticated system, deeply ingrained, that hates new players, and all of a sudden a new player emerges, and our supplies of Sputnik last year exceed and surpass the previous exports of our drugs twofold. So we are faced off with tough resistance. Like in Brazil, officially, the U.S. Department of Public Health said that we convinced Brazil not to purchase Russian vaccine. So we see that the pressure is mounting worldwide, and they're trying to denigrate the Russian vaccine and preventing people from learning the truth about that. So our worldwide studies show high efficiency and safety in Argentina, in Hungary, and in other countries. But you know, the competition, the struggle is quite tough. And some of the big pharma companies are more aggressive, others are less aggressive. The more aggressive ones subdue the less aggressive ones, which is quite visible, which is evident. So they pursue very tough methods of competition. And what is regrettable here is that despite the fact that our vaccine is the most efficient in combating the Omicron, is silenced in the Western media. They try to prevent this info from spreading, but it's unethical because people worldwide should know the truth, because Sputnik V is a good shield against hospitalizations and deaths from Omicron, much better than other vaccines. Right, can you tell us, with respect to the prospects of consolidating and improving our standing, are you working on a solution to see it recognized and approved with the WHO? Well, it looks bizarre, all those statements and reviews and rollbacks. It is so bad when the politics prevail over economics or over public health, which is still worse. So, looking forward, what is your vision of the prospects for future? Will you continue investing in pharma industry? It's not about COVID, but we see that we are aware that in the modern world, in today's world, investments should flow into human capital and infrastructure. You mentioned the public health domain, but within the confines of the Presidential Public Administration Academy, I wonder whether there are prospects and there is interest to invest in education, and it may be quite profitable if properly organized. Well, digital and transport infrastructure may also be deemed as targets, so we started with what happened 10 years before, but now what will happen 10 years after? What is your forecast? Well, without a doubt, and concluding the health issue, I want to say that we probably will be switching to yearly boosters of the vaccine, and we have forged a system of dealing with 70 countries worldwide, and later we'll be able to use this groundwork to promote other high-tech medical and health products and therapeutics at international markets. It is a very important point, and education is a key sector also. We invest there actively, including in the Prosveshchenia company, which is a course book and school book publishing house, a leading enterprise in this sector, and we see huge potential in the possible future transformation that will definitely preserve the foundation of the highest quality of Russian education, adding up additional technological solutions, AI-enabled solutions, and remote access and gaming, which will make it even more interesting. This is what is about to happen with Prosveshchenia.
And the company, of course, has a great potential of expanding our activities to a number of other countries, something we're going to support quite actively. There is a big potential in technology as a whole. Technology changes everything. Everyone is talking about the AI, but it's not just the talk we need to be involved in. We need to think about how AI can be applied in genetics, in agriculture, and mining. And everywhere we see that there is a possibility to raise the efficiency by 30 to 40%. So we are very active in technology and AI in particular, and we believe that there are some very good prospects in here. Nor should we forget, as you pointed out, about the infrastructure, and we'll continue to actively invest in infrastructure. We believe there to be a very big potential in building new infrastructure projects. At the same time, we can render the existing infrastructure projects even more efficient. We know that investment in infrastructure is not always most efficient, most profitable, and we believe that new technology can allow us to make this investment more thrifty and more efficient too. There is a wide scope of investment, and we plan to carry out these investments. And the last avenue we pursue is closer ties with the leading business associations. We have already established the Fund of Funds with the Russian Union of Industrialists, Entrepreneurs. They have a great deal of expertise in investment and will bring together all of our experiences, and we can see that the government and the private enterprises and businesses can invest together and be quite successful in these projects. From the point of view of capital sources, you act as one of the borrowers. Well, yes, we do act as a borrower, but we also act as an investor. Yes, but given that, I have the following question. That is a theme that has become most relevant over the last couple of years, especially in Russia, especially given today's address by the chair of the Russian government. And this theme is a significant spike in inflation. And over the last couple of years, we forgot all about these high inflation rates, and the world hasn't seen anything like this for the last 4 decades. So what do we do about it? You know, inflation always is kind of a double-edged sword. It has a double impact on the investment cycle. So how does it feed into your investment cycle? Well, it's important to talk to the right people at the right time. When the inflation started to spike, we talked to Ray Dalio, one of the most successful investors across the world. He built one of the biggest hedge funds, and when it all started, we asked him. We saw that the U.S. had printed several billions of new dollars that's injected into the world market. How is it going to play out? Where is it going to lead? How is it going to affect the inflation expectations across the world? We need to understand that this is not a specifically Russian problem. It's because of the money funneled by the US and Europe into the world market. Just imagine several dozens of billions of dollars over the last couple of years injected into the world economy. Yes, but yes, of course, inflation was there in specific countries, but it's unprecedented that the inflation rates are flaring up high across the whole world. You are a Russian sovereign fund, and you're also global, and that is why I am asking this question, and I'm putting it to you. Just imagine, all investors across the world are seeing their dollar-denominated investments depreciating, and they need to think about what to do about that. We are trying to invest into resources. The resources are growing. They give a very good return on profits. Technology is yet another promising sector. Maybe the companies there are not always very successful, but still their growth rates are higher than the inflation rates. So this is the approach that is mostly widely spread over the last 18 months. We account for high inflation in our investment decisions. We understand that this inflation comes from the dollars that have been printed, and we understand that many investors are flocking to other currencies. Many prominent investors are trying to set up anti-inflationary funds, and they follow their own specific model to fight high inflation rates. Inflation is eating up much of the investment profits. So, Ray Dalio, what did he recommend to you? Well, he said something very important. First, he said, the coronavirus was spreading so fast. Wasn't there a danger that the market would collapse everywhere? He said, no. Given the volume of money printed, the market is not going to collapse, but it's going to bring about high inflation rates. And he pointed to approaches that can allow us to invest into certain assets like gold, for instance, and their growth is higher than the inflation rates. Thank you, Mr. Dmitriev. I'm not going to even sum up, because I think everything has been said that needed to be said. But in conclusion, what would you like to hear from the experts? The Gaida Forum is an expert forum. Yes, there are many bankers here, many investors too, but it's not an economic forum, even though it's full of economic agenda. It's still an expert forum, and it's about the government talking to the experts. What issues do you believe to be most important across the expert agenda and in the discussions for the forthcoming years? Yes, inflation is one such thing. We have noted it down. But what else would you expect experts to talk about? We need to have an expert assessment of how to distribute resources most efficiently. This is a topic of much import. You can build a reproducing investment cycle. When investment comes in, companies grow, investment becomes increasingly plentiful, thereby creating a virtuous circle of investment. And I think in this particular context, the investment community can think about how to raise the efficiency in different sectors. What do we do about competitiveness and competition? How do we make this competition come true? Efficient allocation of resources is a very big chunk of issues that need to be addressed. There is another thing. When the government plays an important role in the economy, how do we make sure that this does not suppress private enterprises? So our model of co-investment with private sectors, deregulation for private enterprises, creating a good environment for the private business, this is a very big and important component of our strategy. And of course, we need to think about the sanction pressure that's happening. We have to be blunt about it. This sanction pressure is plain and simple an instrument of economic competition, and this instrument, to a large extent, can sabotage and undermine the very principles, the very foundations of economic interaction. Let's take the U.S., for example. For them, additional sanctions that they are proposing basically can undermine trust in the U.S. dollar. The U.S. debt amounts to around 33 billion. It's a record high. 40% of new dollars has been printed out. And investment funds are becoming increasingly wary of what's going to happen to the U.S. dollar. You know, 2.5 trillion US dollars, that's how much the ceiling of debt has been raised. So it's kind of a powder keg for the dollar. And amid this conditions, sending a signal that new restrictions can be slapped and you have to think about transitioning to other currencies, you know, that is another problem because it can undermine trust in the dollar. You asked me about the big pharma, and we see that the big pharma is actively lobbying sanctions against the RDIF to prevent Sputnik V from saving lives. And we believe that these deserves a just assessment, and these also deserves a discussion. When economic competition brings about pressure not just against Nord Stream 2 and other projects, when also it ventures into such humanitarian fields as vaccines, when unfair competition as well as attempts at exerting sanction pressure can prevent countries from getting the best vaccine against Omicron strain, this has to be discussed, and I believe the expert community can discuss these issues, even the most acute ones, because they have serious repercussions, including humanitarian ramifications for a great number of people. That is indeed a very sad story. We could call it even cynical. You know, international reserve currency, well, it's been increased, the money mass has been printed out, and there's sanctions. But there is a history behind that as well. Let's remember Richard Nixon, when the U.S. unilaterally abandoned the Bretton Woods system, when the gold was considered as a reserve, and, you know, the administration said something. The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem. We are not responsible for the trust you've put into the US dollar. And of course, this creates serious concerns. Our central authorities, our central bank, have significantly revisited the structure of our currency reserves, and this is also an important signal. Money mission is not something that happened over the last 2 years. No, it's been happening over the last decade or so, and Well, economic miracles only happen in textbooks of historians in future. We need to understand that as the law of economic forecasts tells us, crisis happens not as soon, but also not as fast as you anticipate. But the reserves we used to have, they helped us to weather this crisis. And thanks to the restructuring of the reserves, we managed to emerge the better after the crisis. And it gives us ground for optimism. We'll weather the storm. But when the pandemic struck, I remembered something that I had read in the Pravda newspaper back in the 1970s. What if the Martians attacked the Earth? I think the US and Russia, the Soviet Union, would have come to an agreement fairly quickly if such an invasion had taken place. So when the pandemic struck, I did hope for such a consensus, for such an agreement. I was in optimism, but, life is always more complex. Well, it seems more complex than in reality. To you personally and to the RDIF, I would like to wish you good health, because upon you, the welfare of our country hinges. Thank you, Mr. Mau, and I would also like to end on a positive note. In the case of Sputnik V, we suggest a very good partner-like approach. You're absolutely correct. When you speak about the macroeconomic policy in Russia, it's stable, and you have spoken about the partnership-based approach, which we demonstrate everywhere, in particular in the fight against coronavirus. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending our forum.